Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Welcome. My name is Sean O'Brien. I am the director of the Human Rights LL.M program here in the law school and assistant director of the Center for Civil and Human Rights. Today, the center and the law school are proud to welcome back to campus Meg Penrose, professor of law at Texas A&M University, where since 2003 she's taught courses on constitutional law, the First Amendment, gender discrimination, the Supreme Court, and criminal procedure. Prior to her current position, she served as professor of law at Texas Wesleyan University School of Law and the University of Oklahoma College of Law. She earned her BA in history from the University of Texas Arlington and her law degree from Pepperdine University, where she was managing editor of the Pepperdine Law Review. And she completed her LL.M degree, her Master of Laws in International Human Rights Law, from Notre Dame Law School in 1999, graduating summa cum laude. It was during her LL.M studies at Notre Dame that I met Meg for the first time. I was a lowly 1L trying to understand. There are no 1Ls here today. Excellent. They have a mandatory meeting that Career Services organized after we had scheduled your talk. So I can say I was a lowly 1L, trying to figure out the difference between a crime and a tort, trying to figure out if international law was really law. And Meg was deep into her master's thesis research on a thesis entitled "Lest We Fail: The Importance of Enforcement in International Criminal Law." You can find that thesis in the library today. She later published this thesis as a law review article, and she's gone on to publish on a wide range of various topics such as sex discrimination, religious liberty, marriage and divorce, social media and free speech, habeas corpus, and the death penalty. But central to her work and all these varied subjects she's taken on have been the demands of justice and human dignity, and their expression and sometimes clash within the Constitution. The Constitution is our guiding star in law, Meg has written. Nearly every American at some time or another has confidently declared, it, whatever it is my constitutional right. In this regard, our Constitution offers a very personal protection that cannot be overstated. Equal justice under law is not merely a phrase that sits atop the Supreme Court. Equal justice under law is our constitutional promise. Her talk today, "The Death Penalty, Dignity, and Doing Justice," brings that constitutional promise into conversation with capital punishment, which Pope Francis recently called, quote, "an offense against the inviolability of life and the dignity of the human person, which contradicts God's plan for man and society and his merciful justice, and impedes that penalty from fulfilling any just objective." For students who are interested in engaging further on the issue, and who are inspired by today's conversation about the death penalty, I'd like to pass around this clipboard from Right to Life and the Center for Social Concerns, so we can keep in touch and figure out how we can respond and move forward together. I'll pass that around here. And now, please welcome back to Notre Dame Law School, Meg Penrose.
Let me just start by saying thank you to Sean and everyone at the Center for Civil and Human Rights. A lot of why I'm standing here today and the work that I'm doing started not in this building. It started next door. And so much of my law career began here, and I come back to share with you a little bit about what I've learned. I'm going to ask that this be as informal as possible because I'm here to visit with you. So if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me. If you have comments, if you want to interject, I welcome that. I really want this to be a discussion about capital punishment. It was my lifelong dream to come to Notre Dame. I got here at age 33. I don't know how old many of you are, but being here has profoundly shaped my entire life in ways that I still don't fully appreciate. And coming back here yesterday, I realized that we, as Notre Dame students, Notre Dame alumni, Notre Dame faculty, we have a privilege to study in a setting that teaches not only law but values. Values of dignity, human dignity, all life matters. And that's something that in a state school, I taught at the University of Oklahoma for a long time, now I'm at Texas A&M, and I teach constitutional law, so I understand. Even though religious liberty is something I write about, it's also something I respect as a state employee. I cannot be using my classroom to be talking about religious matters, but when I was here at Notre Dame, religion, spirituality, values that have its core in Catholic faith are something we discussed regularly. It's something we lived out. And it's something I've tried to continue to give back to the school, not necessarily my time here, not necessarily my treasure here, but other places, my talents. When I go and do work, it's because I had the privilege of sitting in a seat just like you did about 15 or 16 years ago, and I was really grateful. I remain grateful for what I learned here and what I've taken out now and put into practice. The other thing I learned that I think is really important is that which differentiates us is much smaller than we focus on. Right? A lot of times we look at somebody, they look different. We think they must be different. And yet, the great thing about the Center for Civil and Human Rights is it brings together people of different cultures, different races, different religious faiths and traditions. And at least when I was here, we all left a little better because we realized there wasn't that much that was different among us. We all laughed, we all cried, we all grieved, we danced a lot. There was a little drinking involved. We studied the law, but most of us had a yearning for justice. Not just law, but justice. And law and justice are not entirely the same thing. So that's something you will study, and if you have a chance to spend time with the students at the Center for Civil and Human Rights, I think you'll learn a lot about other cultures that are really, really important. It made me a better person. It made me a better lawyer. Because as I said, I realize now our world's very small. And if it was small when I was here in 1999, it's incredibly smaller now. You can instantaneously get on a phone right now and send a message to anyone across the world. You can post something on your social media to anyone across the world. The Arab Spring that happened, right? The uprisings, the social messages that people transmit. It's part of a change that I think is important, not necessarily in law, but in life, and we as lawyers need to adapt. We need to appreciate that. My niece shared something with me this week, and I want to share it with you because when I landed in Chicago yesterday, I was on a bus coming here. I like to take the bus from the bookstore to the airport. And when I got here, I just remembered what I love about Notre Dame and how, as I said, grateful I am. She said, what if you woke up today with only the things you thanked God for yesterday? What would be in your life? And when I got here yesterday, I was like, Notre Dame, excellent. It's one of the things that daily I'm grateful for. When I get to stand and teach at Texas A&M University, I'm grateful because so much of what shaped me started here. So I can't walk into a classroom without remembering and being grateful for having been here. So I can assure you, at least for me, Notre Dame would still be standing, and I hope for you, you have the same experience. As the title reads, today I want to talk to you about the death penalty, dignity, and doing justice. But it's a somber day for me. In less than 3 hours, I have an actual client who will be executed by the state of Texas. He committed a horrific crime, confessed to it on TV. It's part of the reason his execution is taking place. And it's hard, on the one hand, to talk about because it's not just an abstract concept. There are real victims of the crime, and I have a real client. I can walk you through what the last day of someone that's scheduled to die is. Generally, they take them over to the death chamber. They're housed about an hour and a half away. He's been on suicide watch for about a month, and which sometimes seems a bit ironic, but he's been on suicide watch, and in his cell where they keep him under camera watch. He'll be taken to the death chamber, usually, or at least to Huntsville, where it's about 90 minutes away from where he's been living for the last several years. And I presume he will have his last meal and hopefully have some discussions with people that are close to him, perhaps a spiritual advisor. I know the last several days he's been meeting with friends and families. And on the other side, the victims, members of the victim's family, they'll be driving down as well. They'll be going down to see what they believe is justice. And my heart's very heavy for everyone today. I think the death penalty is something that is hard to celebrate on any level. I think it's a tragic reminder of our humanity in the sense that people commit these horrible crimes, and we have to figure out a way, a just way, to deal with the worst among us. What is a just way to deal with those that are the worst among us, that commit the worst crimes? What would be a just penalty? It's not a rhetorical question. What would be a just penalty? Many countries don't have life in prison. Many countries outside the United States, they see that as cruel and unusual. In our country, it's absolutely constitutional. And I stand by constitutional penalties. I stand for the Constitution. So I struggle. As an American, I understand the death penalty is what the jury awarded in this particular case. Were this not my client, I would probably be able to more objectively stand back and say, makes sense. I didn't seek this work out. This work happened upon me. Many years ago, a federal judge called me and said, I need you to take a case. I have an individual who's fired every client, every lawyer he's ever had. And I said, that's not a good way. That's not a good opening introduction to make me want to take this case. But I did. And this individual tried to fire me several times as well, but I'm court appointed. And that means the federal government appoints me. I'm literally the last attorney that an individual on death row has. You hear about all the appeals, you hear about the processes. I'll walk you through a very elementary explanation of what happens in the United States, or at least Texas. I can give you Texas. We have a bifurcated Supreme Court system in Texas, meaning we have one Supreme Court that just hears criminal cases and one Supreme Court in Texas that just hears civil cases. So my client was tried and found guilty and sentenced to death by a jury. Then he went up to an appeal, and then he went up to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which is the Supreme Court for criminal cases. And then his case went up to the United States Supreme Court. All that was really looking at was something I call guilt innocence. Did he actually commit this crime? Was the finding of guilt acceptable? That's the only process you get in the United States dealing with guilt innocence. But when we're dealing with the death penalty, then you move into a separate habeas corpus process. And so in Texas, you go back to the exact same trial court where you were found guilty, and you go before that judge, and essentially you ask, or the question is posed, was there any constitutional deficiency in the trial? And that trial judge sometimes will have a hearing, sometimes she won't. And then it'll go to the Court of Appeals, and then it'll go to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. And then it comes over to the federal level, and that's where I enter the picture. This last silo of process usually takes anywhere from 6 to 12 years. The client I had, the second client I had through court appointment, I have had 15 years, and we're still at we're back at the district court level. So we went federal district court, circuit court, I'm in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and then the United States Supreme Court. If the United States Supreme Court does not intervene in that habeas corpus, then you end up where my client is tonight. We received a denial of certiorari about a week ago in his case. We also filed a petition for clemency, going to the governor of Texas saying, here are all the reasons we think that his sentence should be converted to life in prison without any opportunity for parole. And the governor denied that. Understandably, right? It becomes a political issue. And many of us, this is the conflict for me as an American. We live in a society defined by laws. And we need to follow those laws. And the jury gave a sentence that was reviewed numerous times. I disagree with the resolution. In this case, we were actually the one that's taking place tonight. We actually went before the Court of Appeals at the Fifth Circuit. They invited us to come present oral argument, and I did. and the court ruled against us. In the United States Supreme Court, when we filed our petition for certiorari, they actually sought the record. They wanted to look deeper into this case. So it's not as if this individual hasn't had process, but I've been his attorney roughly 9 years. So I've seen him grow up. He's approximately 30 years old today. Not on today, but today, as I stand before you, he's approximately 30 years old. I've been his attorney for about 9 years. And so these cases, they become part of our legal experience, part of what defines us. And as you can imagine, the work's not popular. I'd even say it's somewhat thankless. Most people don't look at you and go, that's fantastic. You represent someone who killed a police officer. There's nothing to celebrate about that. There's nothing to be proud about that, with one exception. Every individual in the United States deserves representation. That's also from our U.S. Constitution. And by federal statute, these individuals are given lawyers. That's not necessarily why I took this case. As I said, I didn't seek it out. The facts are really difficult for me personally. I come from a family of law enforcement, and this happens to involve a law enforcement officer. So it's a very hard crime. I'm not here to justify the actions of my client. The crime is unjustifiable. But crime and penalty are two separate issues. They're issues that that are students, whether you're part of the Center for Civil and Human Rights or part of the law school, you have the ability to help shape law. You have the ability to decide whether the death penalty is a just penalty, whether it shows the dignity for all human lives. I'm at a point in my career, I'm terribly conflicted about it, as I said. I certainly don't see it as a viable penalty from my religious background. I stand with the Pope on that. I don't see it from a moral background, right? You don't see a parent say, whack, hitting a child, don't hit your brother. That doesn't seem right. But at the same time, I appreciate we have these individuals who have committed crimes that are so difficult for us to accept and to absorb that we've got to come up with a way to penalize that behavior. And so I come back to that same question. What is a just penalty? What's a just penalty that continues to show the dignity of a human person? Is that life without parole? And what do you do for those individuals who go into prison and can't behave? They're just incorrigible. George Bernard Shaw wrote in a short essay called The Crime of Imprisonment, he opposed the death penalty with the exception of the incorrigibles, people who you actually put in prison who could not behave. If you put them in a small confined space and they still cause harm, that's a problem. That was his thesis, not mine. It's a really great read. It's no longer being published, but you should look at that. One of the other things he talked about in that book that I found very helpful was he thought individuals that are sentencing humans should actually have to go spend time in jail to understand what it is, right? So many times we as Americans talk about it as, oh, he got 20 years, he got 30 years. Think back to where you were 5 years ago. 5 years. Now think back 10 years. Now go back 15 years. It's a long time for someone to be in prison. I know that. I've represented some of these individuals for 15 years. I've seen them grow up. I've seen them get married. I've seen some of them get divorced. I've seen their family die. I've seen them take on health problems. The real reason I take these type of cases is because of my mother. Although my mother didn't necessarily support my work in the death penalty, she's the one who brought me to this type of work. And it all comes from Matthew. It's a biblical passage. This is my mother's favorite passage. I'm going to share it with you because I think it's part of doing justice, our call as lawyers to continue to help people. The passage reads as this: "For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you took me in. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? Or when did we see you thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, Assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me. And that was my mother, one of her favorite verses. And the other thing she would say constantly is, all that it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And so from a very young age, my mother called me to serve. As I said, ironically, this was not the type of service she had envisioned, but she read me the verse, and it says going to prison and working with these individuals. They're the people that are discarded. They're the people we don't see. We don't want to see. Some of them are really seedy characters. I've learned a lot about the undercurrent of society that I don't necessarily cherish. But I've learned about service and helping those least deserving of justice. Because I think that's what Matthew basically says. But you do the least of these. The person who doesn't deserve my time, who doesn't deserve my expertise, who has almost so violently broken the social contract that we all ascribe to, that they shouldn't get any help. And yet we help them. When I got here last night, I was fortunate to stop into the Basilica, and it's Founders Day. So if anyone was there with me, that was the day we celebrated the founder of Notre Dame, and it was High Mass. The president actually celebrated Mass. I just happened upon that. It was wonderful. And I listened to the music, and I spent time just in prayer for all the victims of violence, all the crimes we have, all those in prison. And I left, and I called my sister, and she said, how are you doing? I said, it's not going to be a good day tomorrow. That's today. It's just not going to be a good day. Because I know there are going to be a lot of sad people this evening in Texas. So I said, I can't forget about the victim's family. Would never do that. And then I have an individual who I represented, and he's got family that's going to witness the execution. And I said, it's going to be a bad day. And she said something very profound to me. She said, when we fail to have sympathy for any person that dies, we lose a bit of our humanity. And so tonight, as my client is executed, many people will be, I don't want to say cheerful, but they'll feel vindicated. They will feel that he received a just penalty. And then there will be many people who don't live in the United States, particularly as a lot of individuals from outside the United States that write him and don't understand why our country continues to resort to the death penalty. And not every state does. Texas does, as does the United States, our federal government. We certainly just issued the penalty to the Boston Marathon bomber. So it's something we as a country embrace. And a lot of people will look at that with wonderment. Does it make us a better society? I don't know. I'm not taking any more of these cases on because they take heartbeats from me. They're very hard. What is doing justice? I'm unsure. I certainly represented the gentleman who will be executed tonight to the very best of my ability. Spent nights and weekends, mornings where I would wake up and think, okay, this is the way I'm going to go at this case. This is the argument I've got to present. Certainly the court will realize this is correct. And my goal was to make sure he had a constitutionally sound trial. Ultimately, the Supreme Court said he did. And that is their role. And so I have to hope tonight I did everything I could that was assigned to me, that I did justice. I don't know. I hope each of you today that are taking time out of your day to come and listen to me talk will do something to help someone. Do justice. People need us as lawyers to draft wills, to help resolve family issues, child custody issues, real estate transactions that can actually make or break a family's fortune. It may seem odd. It's incredibly meaningful. Doing justice does not only mean representing those in prison. You have a chance, if you're an attorney in the United States, to help people. When folks ask me what I do, I say, I help people. They look at me very baffled. What do you mean you help people? I help people. I'm an attorney. And they're like, oh. They don't connect the two, but that's truly what we are. Right? As attorneys, we help people. People come to us when they are in crisis mode. And usually when they come to us, they talk about my lawyer. Right? Some would say, oh, I need to see a doctor. But I want to talk, I'm going to call my lawyer. Because we have the tools to make a difference. So, in closing, I would say, I wish I could change or improve my mother's message, which is, you are called to serve. Sitting in this room means you are one of the few privileged individuals in the United States, and for those of you visiting from outside the United States, you are a part of the Notre Dame family. Former Dean Link, Father Link, who's here today with us, when I came to orientation with Sean, talked about Notre Dame creating a different kind of lawyer. We were the Maseratis. Do you remember this?
I do indeed.
It has stuck with me since I came here. We were the Maseratis, and Sean and I talked about it when I got on campus, and the message he and I took may have been a little different, but I studied a little bit about the Maseratis. You'll have to correct me if I'm mistaken, because I thought, that's really great. You're right, I'm a different kind of lawyer. I'm a Notre Dame lawyer. Maseratis are handmade. They're not assembly line cars. They're custom ordered, meaning you can get what you want. And they don't produce more than 30 to 40 a year. You are a Maserati. And the greatest part of Maseratis that I learned also is they're made in Italy, the same place, the seat of the Catholic Church. So when Dean Link, now Father Link, told me I was a Maserati, well, that was kind of cool. But when I studied it, I realized I had to live up to that expectation. Because unto whom much is given, much will be expected. And it should be expected. You are a Notre Dame lawyer. People will know you have integrity. People will know you have values. They will know you have a moral compass. What you do with that skill set, with that toolbox, is yours to choose. But I hope you will use your Maserati well and represent those most in need of your help. Thank you very much.
We have lawyers from around the world here. We have law students. We have undergraduate students, students from other disciplines, faculty from around the university. Lots of different types of questions we could take here. Would you be able to?
I welcome any question. I welcome any comment. I welcome any criticism. I am your audience now. Certainly someone has a question or a comment. Go ahead.
If the law is unjust or immoral, does it matter if the constitutional process is correct?
It's a great question. That brings to mind Kim Davis. And you may not have meant to do that. Kim Davis is a person who I believe to have very strong religious values. So she and I stand together on that. She also believes in religious liberty and freedom. She and I stand together on that. I support her. But then there's this law that came down recently from the United States Supreme Court that many people find controversial, unacceptable. Some would call it, what did you say, an unjust law? So it calls to mind the question of civil disobedience. And as I understand her perception, she is acting in civil disobedience. It's certainly what started the civil rights era, and you can hear some people compare her to that. Others may not agree. But what do we do? I'm not sure I'm willing to go to jail to fight an unjust law. She has more moral courage than I do, or a stronger conviction that the law is unjust. I don't know what to do with that conflict, because I'm trying to think of a time where I've seen it so acute, where I've felt so impassioned to think I would go to jail for an unjust law. Can you think of an unjust law right now?
I was sort of thinking the fact that the death penalty is constitutional.
Right, and this is what's really interesting to me. There are 6 Catholics on the Supreme Court right now. So we should all have confidence that there is a clear separation in church and state per the Constitution. Justice Scalia, in fact, remarked when he was challenged how, as a Catholic, he could continue to sign on to these death penalty cases. And he said, if it ever comes to a point where I cannot continue to sign off on these or agree with these, I'll be forced to retire, because I have an obligation as a United States Supreme Court Justice to uphold the Constitution. And so I look at that, regardless of what most people think of Justice Scalia, good or bad. He seems to be one of those individuals that gets varied responses. I really respect that, and I feel very similar to him. If I felt that I feel a lot like Justice Breyer. Justice Breyer wrote a dissent in the Glossop case, and his dissent's very long and very impassioned. And what he said is, the death penalty is not working. It's only being enforced in certain locations, even within the same state. It's only being enforced against certain victims, right? To even get the death penalty, you have to have a special circumstance with the murder. So the ordinary average person, unless there's a crime on top of the murder, their death would not warrant the death penalty. He also talked about the delay in process. My guy has waited 9 years for this penalty. I feel as frustrated as he does, but I also believe in a constitutional democracy that you start with local democracy. Does Indiana have the death penalty?
Yes.
Has Indiana executed anyone in a recent time?
About 4 years ago.
Okay. So, I mean, do you live in Indiana? Now.
I'm from Pennsylvania.
Does Pennsylvania have a death penalty?
They put a moratorium on it pending some committee.
Right. I mean, so I have to say, in a constitutional democracy, and I'm a huge believer in the structure the founders gave us. The fact that it still is vibrant today, even with all the change we have, as when they envisioned this, is just fantastic. And we have checks. We have legislative checks. We can vote people into office that agree with us. It was judged against the Constitution as cruel and unusual. And it's not seen in this country as cruel and unusual. So does that make it how do we know it's an unjust law? Versus just a law with which we disagree. I will tell you, as a constitutional lawyer, that is my struggle. Because I know laws, I don't see the death penalty, and this is me personally, I don't see the death penalty as a viable alternative. Financially, it's extremely expensive, time-consuming. It puts the victims through many years of unresolved issue. As I said, Justice Breyer is right. It's very regionalized. So you can have a person go through the exact same crime in one state and in Texas and in parts of Texas, and they may get the death penalty, and someplace else they will not. And the differentiating feature is truly the location of the crime. I'm not one who thinks breaking an unjust law is the best solution. Maybe it's just I'm too structured. or maybe I haven't. I mean, I was born during the civil rights era, but when I was old enough to understand the laws, there was more integration than there was when I was born. But I wonder what I would have done then. I represented a group of protesters that sued the city of Dallas the last 3 years, and they were upset about something opening up in Dallas. And so they were literally arrested for standing on a street corner in Dallas holding a sign that said, "I heart the First Amendment." And then one of the others said, "I love the Bill of Rights." And I thought, this is a great case. So I got to go defend them in the criminal setting, and it took 1.5 years to get their sentences overturned. But as they were going through the suit against the city of Dallas to get the law struck down as unconstitutional, and so maybe I'm answering my question, I'm finally getting to an answer, it's coming to me. When we sat in deposition, I realized that one of my clients had marched with Martin Luther King. Another one of them had protested all of the restaurants in Dallas that were not integrated. And I thought, wow. When I left, how fortunate was I? You know how I fought an unjust law in Dallas? I represented people who had the courage to stand up to the law. So maybe that's the answer. We look for those causes and ways to represent these individuals. You need to be the person that steps into my shoes. I'm tired. These cases have taken a lot out of me. We need people. We need people that are doing this work. Because the other thing is these individuals need good lawyers. We need to be able tonight, when my client is executed, to believe he received due process. That he received lawyers who really had sleepless nights trying to make sure his trial was constitutionally fair. That's what we need. So maybe the best way, are you a lawyer?
I'm an undergrad.
Undergrad. You need to go to law school. You definitely need to go to law school. Because as a lawyer, I think there are people who can help. We help right wrongs. We help people in that situation. Is that a good enough answer?
That makes sense.
I mean, what does your instinct tell you is the best way to respond to an unjust law?
Don't follow.
Okay. Is the Kim Davis solution. Right? And that's why I say so many people have treated her in such a pejorative manner, but honestly, there are reasons I can see what she's done. I would not have done that. But I'm not going to judge her for doing that because she truly believes, from a religious perspective, she's doing what she's called to do. She's not following what she believes is an unjust law. Now, the problem in our society is who gets to decide what are the unjust laws. Because there are individuals who have waited to get married that go to her saying, "This is an injustice to me." But who weighs these injustices? Go ahead.
You yourself said all it takes for evil to triumph is for good to do nothing.
Right. I said my mother.
Well, you said
My mother said all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Correct.
if you don't do anything against the law, it's just evil to triumph.
I think we can educate. I mean, every person that is sitting here today can now have a discussion with people you know and love about the role of law in bettering society. We have the power of vote. We can vote. And I know so many people go, our vote doesn't matter. You know why it doesn't matter? Because not many people vote. There are so many Americans who have this privilege that was kept from many people for years and years, and they don't go vote. You can go to city council meetings. You can go, are you in law school? Okay. You need to go to law school. So now my answer is you really need to go to law school. You need to be educated. You need to speak out. You need to educate yourself. You need to learn about these issues and consider both sides. How do I help? Let's flip the script. I represent this individual, but what about his victims? What's justice? I come back to that. What's justice for that individual? We don't want to see that individual go commit a crime. We don't want to. There's such a delicate balance between becoming a society that disrespects the law and therefore then acts lawlessly. I mean, law is what keeps the social order, the social compact, which is why when an individual, as my client did, commits certain crimes, that society feels vindicated in imposing certain penalties. Go ahead.
You mentioned the term cruel and unusual a few times.
Mhm.
And
In the Eighth Amendment.
Right, and that's the sticking point for me. So although the law is in the Constitution, the decision about what is cruel and unusual is not clearly described there. And it seems to me that we have slid further and further with things I read about people spending years in solitary confinement, or the way we're executing people, or all these things, that there needs to be a serious conversation about, is anything cruel and unusual? I don't know. We can waterboard people now, it's not torture. We can leave people in solitary for 15 years, that's not cruel and unusual. We can kill mentally disabled people, that's not cruel and unusual. What is anything possibly in our universe cruel and unusual?
The answer is absolutely yes. I think the Glossop case that the Supreme Court issued this last term strengthens your argument, which is what is the limit? What is it that we're going to say when enough is enough? But your question, are you a lawyer?
No. It's too late. I'm not
It's
going
never too late. My sister's in her 50s. I'm trying to get her to go to law school because she's so smart and so analytical. And I keep telling her, you could be helping people. This all goes back to Marbury versus Madison. One of the first cases. Are there any lawyers in the room?
Yeah.
And I'm glad for all the non-lawyers. I'm thrilled to have you here, and I hope this, if nothing else, gives you a little sense of this is what law school's like. But it goes back to Marbury versus Madison, where Chief Justice John Marshall eloquently said, it is emphatically the province and the duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. Okay? With that one phrasing, we in the United States began using judicial review. So we rely on the court. Now, this is not the same thing as judicial supremacy. Just because the court decides an issue doesn't necessarily mean it's correct, because the court has the ability to revisit issues. But historically, the court is the final arbiter of what the Constitution means. So the 9 individuals, do you know the 9 individuals on the Supreme Court?
I know 7 of the names, I think.
Excellent. How many of you in here know the 9 individuals on the United States Supreme Court? Raise them high. Okay. And well, the interesting thing, I'll tell you, I ask this always, the first day, my constitutional law class, I tell my students to take out a sheet of paper and write down the 9 justices. And these are individuals who've already had a full year of law school. And they look at me with this panic. What do you mean? I mean, you need to know who these 9 individuals are. Now, one of the reasons you don't know who these 9 individuals are is it's an unelected branch of our government. Early on, it was referred to as the least dangerous branch. Most people nowadays would probably say that's not at all true. Unelected, life tenure. The only check we have on them is impeachment. They tell us what is cruel and unusual. During times, I'll answer the waterboarder, give some context to waterboarding. During times of war and military situation, the Supreme Court tends...
Start with that.
Sorry?
Then we're going to start calling terrorism war, which is also an invention of...
I think you are right that we have to be careful as a society in checking our values constantly and talking about it and saying things are certain things are unacceptable. We have been executing people for a really long time in this country, and so then the court looks at that and says, how is that unusual in the United States? Now, if you were to look at our peer group across the world, we're in a very small minority of countries that utilize execution. That's accurate. And that alone is not enough to say it's unusual. And cruel generally means it's just, I'm not even sure we have a good constitutional definition of what cruel would be. Because the issue with lethal injection mean, the fascinating thing is you don't usually have a physician in there inserting the IVs because the medical profession takes the Hippocratic oath, first do no harm. I'm paraphrasing, I don't think that's exactly how it's read. But so you rarely have a medical individual who's willing to participate. And so one of the botched executions in Oklahoma was because the person literally couldn't find a vein. They tried the arms, they tried the jugular, they ultimately went with a vein in the groin area. And unbeknownst to the team that was working on it, the needle came out. And so only part of the chemicals were going in, which is why that particular execution was so prolonged. It wasn't the formula, it wasn't the drug composition, it was done improperly because it's not done under medical supervision. It's not necessary. I mean, there's probably more regulations that we have in euthanizing animals on the one hand, right? Because you're there with a veterinarian, they know the type, that they're actually trained to end a life. But I have a lot of confidence in the United States Supreme Court. I have a lot of confidence in the Constitution. I have a great deal of disappointment about the death penalty. But I don't know from a constitutional perspective. You said just wear one hat right now, Meg. Just wear your constitutional law hat. I don't know that it's cruel and unusual under our past definitions, which may mean the definition is bad. Perhaps. Go ahead.
Hi. I would like to ask you, after all these years and having working with these clients, have you come up with an idea of what would be a just penalty for this type of crimes?
You know, I guess I'd like us to go back to the mindset that certain people can be rehabilitated. We have stopped using prison as a form of rehabilitation and forgiveness, right? The notion, but it's so hard because my solution is probably not my law hat. My solution may be my Catholic hat.
Sure.
I believe in forgiveness. I believe in redemption. I believe in rehabilitation. But when you have some of these individuals that commit crimes that verge on unspeakable in ways that are difficult to talk about, even casually today, life without parole is also a very, very hard penalty. I mean, I hear people tell me, and I love this when folks learn some of what I do, they'll say, oh, well, I understand in prison they have TV and they have this and they have that. And I'm like, that's not Texas prison. I don't know where prison is like that, but in Texas prison, as you indicated, if you have one person that misbehaves, an entire unit can be put on lockdown. An entire unit. So I might not have misbehaved, but you misbehaved, and so everyone in the room is on lockdown. We don't get access to mail. We don't get access to the commissary. In Texas, we also have something called food loaf, where if somebody misbehaves with their food, we would bake the meal into like a meatloaf, but they call it food loaf because it's the entire meal, rather than serving a proper meal. And I don't have the answer. I don't.
Because I also believe in rehabilitation, but I think that for these cases, if they didn't have the death penalty, it would be life imprisonment.
That's the other option in Texas, correct?
I don't find the importance of, well, I do, but the rehabilitation inside a life imprisonment. Like they will be in prison for life, so I don't know.
But here is the opportunity I'm going to give you. In Texas, we have something called the Texas Offender Mediation Program, where an inmate can actually face the victims of their crime. If, let's say, that an individual has murdered someone, and then their family members can come and look at that individual and be able to say things and perhaps forgive. Can you imagine the power of a victim forgiving an individual who's not worthy of that forgiveness in the sense we usually think about it? And so there are even those rehabilitation. Because if we, and it depends where we start. If we believe every life has value, every single life, then even that time in prison can be well spent. But that, on the one hand, that doesn't seem like much of an option. I can tell you this, most of the individuals I represent see that as a wonderful option. Now, I have worked with an individual that said no more appeals. I want to be executed. I'm tired of waiting. I don't like living in prison. Prison is awful. I want to be executed. And in Texas, they made this individual go through a psychological evaluation to make sure they were competent to make that decision. And once they were declared competent, they were permitted to be executed. Because that particular individual said life in prison is worse than death. But by and large, most of the individuals who are facing a sentence of death would far prefer life in prison, I think. Go ahead.
I am from Spain and I study law. So
Excellent. A Spanish lawyer.
So it's a country where we don't have this death penalty.
You do not.
No, and I would like to know more about this debate in this country. So I have three not simple questions just to encourage the debate. First of all, is it just the death penalty, which means if a death is paid with another death, what's the difference between justice and revenge in the theoretical level? The second question, is it useful to prevent crimes? So we can compare the statistics from the US and other developed countries. I don't think it is, but we can debate about if it's useful or not. And third of them, is it legal? Because I think the only debate that is being held in this country is how to conduct the death penalty, avoiding the cruel and unusual treatment that you mentioned that is forbidden by the Constitution. So how to conduct this death penalty in a humane way.
Right.
But I ask myself, is there any possible humane way of killing or taking a life by the state or the society?
I'm going to answer that last question first, so maybe go in reverse order. But the Pope seemed to say no. When the question of lethal injection was being debated in the United States last year, there were a few judges, federal judges, and many individuals that studied the death penalty and said, actually, the most humane way to execute an individual is through firing squad. Simple. We've never had one not work. It's extremely quick. It's far quicker than lethal injection. And because the way that it's conducted, where you have a group of individuals shooting and one of them has a blank, the individual will never know whether they were the person who killed. So there are some individuals who said that's at least a humane way to do it. You get to decide if you agree with that. And coming from Spain, you certainly are in another country that has managed to combat crime without resorting to the death penalty. As far as the empirical data as to whether it's a deterrent, I think the answers are somewhat mixed. I mean, I certainly think there are people that think it deters, but I can tell you most of the individuals I've represented, they tend to have similar backgrounds. They tend to have really bad family backgrounds. There's almost always drug and alcohol abuse. The individual that's going to be executed tonight was addicted to alcohol at age 8. 8. When children at age 8 still think animals can talk. They watch movies. They believe in fairy tales. This was a young man at age 8. And because you cannot buy alcohol at age 8 in Texas, someone was providing that alcohol with great regularity. So then we ask, where was the failure? Was it a familial failure? Was it a systemic failure? He got in trouble before this last crime. And it was known in all the records by the state that he had alcohol and drug addiction issues. They were never corrected. Many other similarities for individuals on death row have some type of physical or sexual abuse. And so you have these group of individuals, and the best way I can explain it, most dogs don't just bite, right? And you can tell if a dog has been hit a lot. If you go to pet a dog and a dog goes down like that, chances are that dog's been hit a lot. And then the other way you can tell is sometimes dogs act extremely aggressively. And I'm not equating humans to dogs. Don't take that. It's not a perfect analogy. But with every case I've worked on in the death penalty, these individuals have lives and backgrounds that are so vastly different from mine, it's hard to believe this could happen without intervention, without someone helping a child at a point where their life could have been saved and rescued. And instead of the intervention, this person grows up, continues to drug, alcohol, physical addiction, turns to violence, commits a crime. The cycle's not broken. And ultimately the person is put to death. And I'm going to use your phrasing, that's a vengeance or an eye for an eye. It's very Old Testament, right? Is that just? That's a philosophical question. In our country, it's no longer a legal question, or at least it's not a pending legal question. Those of you that are still an undergraduate can resurrect the question by starting to talk, write, think about it, dialogue, vote. There are so many things we can do in our constitutional democracy, but what is justice? I'll ask you the question. What do I do for an individual who kills another person? What's a proper penalty?
Before you ask, I am a lawyer.
I know you're right.
And I'm not going to repeat the Maserati speech, although I do remember it. But I am going to talk about what it means to be a different kind of lawyer.
Okay.
And which is the other part of that speech. And I agree very much with your mother, which is that we have to decide as lawyers what we can tolerate. I mean, I always think in my present gig as a priest, I think of the Good Samaritan story, where the priest and the Levite both say to themselves, what will happen to me if I go and try to help that man? Mm-hmm. But the Good Samaritan asks a different question. He says, what will happen to that man if I don't try to help him?
Right.
And that's what we've all got to think about here. What will happen to these people? And you're right. As you know, I serve lots of prisons. I just got out of prison a little over an hour ago. And almost everybody but one person, and I've served thousands, was abused as a child. I don't mean yelled at.
Right.
I mean was physically or sexually abused as a child. And we've got to think about what can we do to help. Don't say to me, we can't do anything. Because virtually everybody I serve believes that everybody's abandoned them. What is important about your work is that it says to people, I didn't abandon you.
Right.
I'm going to give you the representation that you deserve. Whether they deserve it or not. By the way, everybody makes a big mistake when they talk about forgiveness of whether that person deserves to be forgiven. That's not the question. The question about forgiveness is, are you person enough to get that burr out of your saddle and do forgiving? Because it's not about the to be forgiven, it is about the forgiver. And we've all got to think about that. So as I look at people and as you look at people, we've got to ask that question, what will happen to this person if I don't care? And your mother's right. All it takes is
Good men to do nothing.
is to say good people aren't doing anything. And when politicians tell me it's not in my bailiwick, I say, oh yes it is. You took that out. And it's in mine too. And I'm not going to end up agreeing with a lot of people. And it doesn't matter. But I do think about the question. And we all need to think about the questions. And we may come to different conclusions, but we all need to think about the questions. That's what a different kind of lawyer does. Different kind of lawyer says, yeah, that's something I got to think about. As you may know, I was once a civil rights lawyer back when that had some meaning. And you had to think about, and you know, as I say, just got out of prison, and there's a lot of those guys that I hugged and talked to today that I wouldn't trust for anything.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they're not my brothers.
Right.
Or my sisters in the case of the women. So that's what makes for justice. Justice is what I am able to give, not what they deserve.
Excellent.
It's what I'm able to give, and it's what you give. And thank you for that.
Absolutely. And as I said, I mean, everyone in this room, even the non-lawyers,
Right?
especially non-lawyers, need to find a way in your area of expertise, in your world, to not walk past the person that needs you.
Don't walk past.
Don't walk past, because I agree, our eyes should be on not who will help them, but what if I walk past? Because it also takes something of us when we turn a blind eye to suffering. I think that that's a very heavy burden for us to bear.
Well, thank you. There, you promised a journey, and you've taken us with you on your journey. That was a very intimate and honest sharing of the journey that you're on, and the journey that Father is on, and others like Steve Fallon, and others in this community that are here that are not walking past, and that are responding the way that you've responded. And for you to kind of share the conflict between what you know as a truth in your heart,
Right.
and what your responsibilities are as a lawyer. It was absolutely fascinating. Not a place that's easy to go in a lecture either, or a presentation in the classroom. I know all the tricks for guiding the conversation away from those topics, and you took them on head on. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. I'll stay and answer questions. I saw you had a question, so I'll stay as long as you want to visit.
Well, I just have one real fast one. Again, thanks for coming out here, Professor, and thank you, Father. I just wanted to ask you a lawyer question real quick, and I guess that would be, how do you deal with, because you've dealt with a lot of people on death row, and you said that it's something that occurs to you over and over again, you know? You've put in late weekends and late nights and everything else, and you're confident that you've done the absolute best you can do. But I guess my question to you would be, how do you maintain that confidence? Because even though I've never took the death penalty case yet.
Right.
Even the things that I've done over my 2 summers, I mean, I go back and second guess. Well, maybe I could have put in an extra hour here, or if I found this case in my research, or
It sounds to me like you're doing exactly what I do. Earlier today, when I was talking to co-counsel, the other gentleman that's on this case with me today, we asked ourselves, did we do it all? Did we do everything? Because if we didn't, I don't know how I'd live with that. And I really, truly believe we did our best. A very difficult case, a very difficult set of circumstances. We have to work within the law. I feel like we packaged it well. Now, I'll tell you, I argued before the Fifth Circuit, and when I got the opinion back that we lost, I sat down and thought of all the ways I could have done it better. All the ways. But they didn't tell me in advance what they were going to decide. They didn't give me the cues. But a good, ethical lawyer always asks themselves, am I doing enough? Am I? And you think it through. But at some point you also have to say, yes, I really believe I've checked every case. And we're going to make mistakes. That's why they call it the practice of law. I'm not saying I did perfect in this case. I know, like I said, I'd like to have my argument. I need 5 minutes back for my Fifth Circuit argument. Because there's just something I could have said that I didn't, but I would have never known until they ruled. And there's some facts in my particular case that probably I couldn't have argued around. We know we've done our best in our heart when we know we've done our best, right? Athletes talk about it all the time. Leave it all out on the field. I come from a family of athletes. And so we say that a lot. I left it all out on the field. Sometimes I didn't have a lot to give. sometimes everything I left on the field just wasn't the best. It was all I had at the time, and I think we're imperfect, and we practice and we try, and I think you'll know. The fact that you ask yourself whether you did your best tells me you're the Maserati. Because if you worry about that, then you're doing better than many.
Oh, better that you should say it, because I'm not going to, classify myself as a Maserati.
I heard it here first, so thank you guys very much. I appreciate it.